Hey, it's Corey. I'm currently working on a new horror anthology called Welcome Week with Screenager Productions, the minds behind Satan's Servant. We're making a film about the horrors of college, and we're bringing together college-age film students from all over the world to work on it. We're currently fundraising on Indiegogo and would really appreciate your support. Whether it's sharing or donating, anything helps. Thank you so much, and if you'd like to learn more, you can find us on Indiegogo at Welcome Week, or you can visit my blog, gorycorey.com. Thanks!
Welcome to Film Strip. These podcasts are spoiler-filled as we discuss the plots, characters, and themes of the films in review. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.
Welcome to Film Strip.
I'm Ryan.
And I'm Lindsay. Welcome back, Ryan. I'm glad we didn't scare you off.
I'm surprised you wanted me back to begin with.
We definitely did. And wanted to get you in on another movie outside of Talented Mr. Ripley, though.
Fond memories.
Talented Mr. Ripley might have a better popcorn rating than this one.
That will be determined at the end of this.
We'll see. Yeah, we'll talk it through. We'll talk it through and see where we're at. So today we are reviewing The Last Airbender, starring Noah Ringer, Nicola Peltz Beckham, Jackson Rathbone, Dev Patel, Sean Tube, Asif Manvi, Cliff Curtis, and Seychelle Gabriel. Directed by M. Night Shyamalan and based on the early aughts animated television series Avatar, it was released in 2010 on a $150 million budget, and it grossed over $131 million at the box office. That's just in the US and Canada, though. It did gross over $319 million worldwide, and it was nominated for 12 different awards, including a Kids' Choice Award, which makes sense as it is a Nickelodeon film, and won 8 awards, including the prestigious Razzie and Village Voice Award for Worst Film. So let's talk about background with the movie. Ryan, when did you first see this movie? What's your background with it?
Okay, so I got introduced to Avatar: The Last Airbender with my brother. I had gone off to college, and my brother and I, we've always been kind of close, and he said, hey, you should watch this show. And I'm like, okay. And then I started watching it, and I was like, it's really like in-depth, great characters, beautifully done animation-wise. And so like my brother and I, like that was our, like the thing that we kind of connected at, you know, me being a college student, him almost going off to college. When we, so my parents, for their 25th wedding anniversary thought, you know, it would be great. Let's go to Duck, North Carolina and bring our children and all of their friends with them.
You ate duck donuts while you were there, right?
No, I wish. I don't think Duck Donuts was like really around when I was there, in my defense. But I did eat cupcakes. I did eat duck cupcakes. But so the movie had just come out, and we were like, oh, let's go see it. So our parents dropped us off at the local theater in Duck, North Carolina, and all of us were sitting there watching it and stuff like that. And I won't tell you how we felt about it. I'll get into that later. But that is my background. Lindsay, how about you?
Hey, so I had only really seen 1 or 2 episodes of Avatar, probably while one of my brothers were watching the cartoon. So I didn't have a ton of exposure to it. And I was talking to my Brian about your movie prowess and how you have a fair amount of knowledge and have watched quite a lot of anime. And that led us to the conversation of, hey, have you guys ever done Avatar? So this suggestion was actually my Brian's suggestion. And then when I presented it to you, you said, yes, let's do it. I hate that movie.
Yes.
And I quote,
spoilers.
And I'd never seen it. So of course I'm in. So that's it. I watched this movie with you a week ago, exactly today. and I am looking forward to getting into it. So before we do that, I'll give all the listeners as quick as I can, plot summary of the movie in case you're coming into it fresh. So beware, spoilers ahead. So the film begins with 14-year-old Katara and her 15-year-old warrior brother Sokka near a river at the South Pole. They are tracking a tiger seal when they see something glowing beneath the ice, and an ice sphere appears with a boy, Ong, and a flying bison sloth beaver falcor thing named Appa trapped inside. Unknown to them, Ong is the long-lost avatar who is a spiritual figure that holds the world in balance through every incarnation. However, his disappearance allowed the Fire Nation to declare war on the other nations being the Air Nomads, the Water Tribes, and the Earth Kingdom. That was in the Fire Nation's attempt to conquer the world. Zuko, an exiled prince of the Fire Nation, is on a quest to find the Avatar and bring him as a prisoner to his father in hopes of redeeming himself. Ong reveals himself to Zuko while staying with the Water Tribe and surrenders himself to Zuko on the condition that he agrees to leave the village alone. Now, Ong manages to escape, and his new friends, Katara and Sokka, visit the Southern Air Temple, which is Ong's previous home, where they discover that Ong was in the ice for approximately 100 years and that the Fire Nation wiped out all air nomads. So in despair, Ong enters the Avatar state and finds himself in the spirit world, where he encounters a dragon spirit that tells him to make his way to the Northern Water Tribe to master waterbending. They eventually make their way to an Earth Kingdom controlled by the Fire Nation and incite a rebellion by reminding the disgruntled Earthbenders that Earth was given to them. Now, upon defeating the firebending army, Katara is given a waterbending scroll that she uses to perfect her waterbending and help Ong learn waterbending as they make their way to the Northern Water Tribe. Ong is captured again by a group of Fire Nation archers. However, a masked marauder, the Blue Spirit, helps Ong escape from his imprisonment. The group makes it to the Northern Water Tribe, and immediately Sokka befriends the Northern Water Tribe princess, Yue. And when we say immediately, we mean immediately. The Fire Nation fleet is not far behind them. They attack and capture Ong as he enters the spirit world to find the dragon spirit to give him the wisdom to defeat the Fire Nation. Returning to his body, Ong battles Zuko before Katara freezes him. As the battle escalates, Iroh watches Zhao capture the moon spirit, which with its water spirit counterpart had assumed the form of a fish. Despite Iroh's pleas, Zhao kills the moon spirit, which strips the waterbenders of all their abilities to waterbend. Yue explains to everyone that the moon spirit gave her life as a newborn, and she is willing to give it back to restore the spirit. Zhao is then drowned by waterbenders, and Ong uses the ocean by forming a gigantic wave to drive the armada back. When the waters calm, we see Ong finally fully accepting his destiny as the Avatar. The movie ends with Fire Lord Ozai appointing his daughter Azula to capture the Avatar. So, okay, this movie was let's just get the bad acting and the even worse script out of the way right now. So, there is sometimes I can't tell if it's bad acting or bad script writing or both. And because these actors have been in so many other things, I have to assume that it's bad script writing.
And directing.
So, Ryan, I really need your thoughts on this. So, as like our Avatar expert in this room, because it's just two of us.
Okay. Well, the one thing that's kind of frustrating is that, like, I don't want to try to compare it to the anime or the cartoon. It is a cartoon. A lot of people are like, Avatar: The Last Airbender is not an anime. So let's make that known.
Okay.
So the thing is that, like, I am fine with doing a live action version of this. But my biggest issue with this in film as its entirety is that it depends on people who have seen it. Because we can talk about it later, is that the exposition is like thrown at you for 2 minutes at a time. And you're like, wow, if this was a standalone film, it would really suck. And that is but like, the thing is that, like, especially because for those of you who are not aware with the cartoon series, there were a couple of seasons and they're all called a book of some kind. So this is the Water book, season 1. And the characters in it are very young and naive, and there's a lot of humor in it. There's still, of course, the sad parts to it,
because they're kids.
They're kids, and especially with Aang. I'm sorry, the pronunciations in that film just drove me nuts. In the movie, they call him Ong, but his name is Aang in the cartoon. His is, I think, the most interesting because he's still such a young child. And he's very bright and lively and wants to have fun and everything like that. But in this movie, he's, for some kid who's like supposed to be like bright and bubbly, you see it for like 2 seconds at the beginning of the film. And then the rest of the time, he's just, you might as well have just been like, he's so curmudgeon-y. He's so sad the whole time.
He is. I kind of get it because he's very recently learned that his entire tribe and every person he's ever known was brutally murdered.
Yes, and I agree with you on that standpoint. But at the beginning, I was just upset. I just ran off because I was upset. Oh, we got caught in a storm,
Yeah.
That wasn't enough, I think, to make up for the fact that he's still until later seasons, he's the youngest out of all of them.
Yeah, I will say that he does walk a line between being a child and a 114-year-old man.
Yep.
He, especially in those moments where he's so self-aware that he's feeling this way, and he's like, oh yeah, exactly what you said.
Yeah.
Yep, this is what happened. I recognize that. It was silly. I'm done. And then he has these little, very few, I will say, and I know you agree with me, that he has very few, but they still exist, moments of playfulness throughout the film. But you're right. From the few episodes that I saw in the cartoon or animated series, if we want to get technical, actually, that's a good point. Would you consider this a cartoon or an animated series?
It is.
Let's get into semantics for a minute.
So for me, it's an animated series. However, for some, it's considered a cartoon.
Okay.
And I think that's because it is coming from Nickelodeon, and this was like
That's
their
a good
first
point.
kind of thing. Whereas, like, when you think of Nickelodeon, you think of things like SpongeBob, and if you're of the older generation, like Angry Beaver and Real Monsters.
Yeah.
And then you have this, which is sort of like, it's not an anime. It's not per se a cartoon either. So for me, it's an animated series because I think that it's kind of like a nice combination of the two of them.
Yeah.
And it's not, but like if you're somebody who's into cartoons versus anime, you will definitely see a difference in like art styles and everything like that, and fluidity. That being said, though, it's borderline because if you've seen the show, the fluidity, especially when it comes to the bending aspect, is very much needed, which I'm certain we'll get into later when we start talking about the different benders that we are introduced to in this movie.
Yes.
Because we talked about Aang, of course, but of course we also have to talk about some of the other major.
Every time you say Aang, I feel like you mean Ong.
No, I mean Aang. Like, I mean Sokka instead of Sokka.
Yes.
And Katara instead, Katara. They do actually keep
Katara.
her name. They do keep her name the same.
That is a point that I wanted to talk about. So for you listeners, Ryan will likely use the animated series pronunciations, and I will probably use a lot of the film pronunciation.
Okay. That's okay. I don't know if M. Night Shyamalan picked these pronunciations because that's technically how they're supposed to be pronounced, or if it's just.
Do you know what though? I bet. Well, you know, and I'm fully conjecture here, but I directed a play, Scapin, also pronounced Scapin, also pronounced
Finding Dory.
million different other, So
Escape. It's funny. It's almost spelled like escape.
So one of the decisions that had to be made as a director was, how are we pronouncing this name? And so he may have just made a decision, though it's odd that he would have made a decision based like outside of the animated series.
Well, he depends on it so much because, like I said, like certain exposition is like force fed into you within like a minute of time. So it's like, why does he go above and beyond to change these pronunciations when he's basically depending upon people to have watched the animated series to enjoy this film? Enjoy in quotations.
Yeah, I mean, having not seen the animated series, I would say that I didn't not enjoy the film, knowing nothing about it, but it was very helpful having you watch it with me because I could pause it and ask you questions.
You were like,
I was watching it.
Did this happen? Yeah. But not like, did this happen? No, it happened like this. And then but you know, and that's the thing that I think is like kind of frustrating is that like, if it was its own standalone film, would you enjoy it as it is when you wouldn't have someone like me or someone who's watched a series? Or if there was a series that it was based on, would you enjoy it as a result of that?
Right. No. So I think I would enjoy the film based purely on the fact that it was a visual experience.
I will agree with you on that one.
And I really appreciated that. However, I probably would have gotten hung up on the poor scripting.
It was really
and the
bad.
Poor delivery of the scripting.
And not to mention the zoom-ins.
Yes. Oh, yes. Let's talk about the zoom-ins.
God, you could see pore counts.
Yeah, nose hairs.
You could see blackheads, probably.
In HD, yeah.
It was
absolutely.
Yeah, on your TV. It was just, the zoom-ins were so unnecessary.
Yeah. So this movie was released in 2010.
Yes.
Which, I mean, I guess.
But that's what he does, is M. Night Shyamalan. He does the zoom-ins.
Yeah. I mean, HD was pretty, and well, 4K wasn't yet, but HD was pretty ubiquitous by that point in time. Like, most people had HD televisions.
But you don't need to zoom in to be like, I understand it, like if you're talking like Sixth Sense style, because there were some very intimate moments, and it's just like, and I get that he's trying to keep it like intimate, but it's like, if there are two people in the shot, and I can count their eyelashes, it gets a little ridiculous.
It became a little campy at certain points, I think,
because it was one zoom in shot to another zoom shot.
Yeah.
To another zoom shot.
And it didn't feel
intimate.
I was going to say it felt intentional, but it didn't feel like there was intentional thought behind it. I don't, if that makes any sense at all.
No, but that's the point of zoom in shots, is to feel this intimate claustrophobia. Was it absolutely necessary? For those of you, we'll give an example. So there was a particular scene where Aang was talking to Katara and Sokka about why he ran away from the air tribe. Yes. The air nomads. Sorry, spoiler. That's why he disappeared, was because he ran away, because he didn't want to be the Avatar.
It's 2022. If you haven't seen the movie yet, I don't feel bad about spoilers.
Well, okay, yeah, fair enough. So like he's explaining it to them, and it's a zoom in on his face. And then the next thing is like Katara and Sokka being like, well, wait a minute. Well, why didn't you want to be the Avatar? Because they wouldn't let me have a family. So it's a zoom in on his face, and then it's back to them. So it's like this weird back and forth. So there's no sense of like, it's when the zoom in is like that, it is supposed to make you feel like you're somewhat entrapped, or it feels like it's a secret. And this wasn't necessarily a secret or needed to be a secret, because I mean, I feel like Aang would have explained it to anybody who had asked the question. So it's like, are the zoom-ins necessary for this film?
Right.
Except for our favorite scene, which we'll get to later.
There was, I think, another zoom-in, and forgive me, it has been a week since I've watched
There were a lot of zoom-ins.
There was like a Zhao Iroh zoom-in, I feel like, at one point.
Oh, yes, I remember that.
Where it was was like, that is a lot of eyeball right there.
Was it when they were talking about the spirit, about murdering the spirit?
That's exactly what it was.
And then
right.
because like my God, you could probably like see the blood veins like bursting in Iroh's eyes when he's like, wait, you're gonna do what?
Which honestly was a cool point. All right, so maybe the zoom-ins were not incredibly effective in that scene. However, Iroh was incredibly effective in that scene.
I loved Iroh. I actually will say, out of everybody, I felt like the Fire Nation was done. I'm not going to count Lord Ozai, and I have reasons behind that. But I thought that Iroh and Zuko and Azula, we'll get to her later.
Yeah,
were very well done. I actually felt the Fire Nation had a little bit more depth to them than actually Aang did, considering it's his story.
Yeah,
and then unfortunately, the Water Tribe, because this was their whole season where you really learned about Katara and Sokka as siblings, as a family, and then of course Yue and other important waterbenders. I felt like for this being their book, we didn't really learn about them. And I felt like they were butchered probably the most in this series. But
I just felt like why, if not now, when? I felt like with the waterbending tribe, I felt like I was looking at Game of Thrones a lot of times, but like not a good Game of Thrones.
No.
Like a last season version of Game of Thrones.
We watched that together.
We did. And I was thinking like, Daenerys Stormborn with the white hair and the moon goddess and all of that. So Game of Thrones had not come out yet, so we can't say that M. Night Shyamalan took anything from that unless you read the books. But
touche.
Yep. But you still get like this elfin feel or this Lord of the Rings feel or this never-ending story feel. And we could go on and on and on about all of the movies that
oh my God, we did.
Yeah. There were so many never-ending story moments. And if you haven't seen that, what's wrong with you? Go watch Never-Ending Story seriously. Now. So there are some very distinct moments. And as someone who really, really likes the Never-Ending Story and has seen it many times since I was a kid, there were Appa, right?
Yes,
that's
Appa,
the name.
yes.
So Appa is absolutely Falcor.
Oh, yes. That's why we made the reference.
Yeah, he's just a snuggly Falcor without bubbles on his back.
I love Appa.
You have this dragon that appeared in the same way as this wolf appeared in Neverending Story.
Yeah.
We didn't have an Atreyu moment, which I appreciate. But
I wouldn't have been mentally prepared for that.
Yeah. But I mean, he did have his little monkey thing. Yeah.
Lemur bat.
Which is very Golden Compass, which wasn't a film at the time.
Correct. We made Game of Thrones references. We made Neverending Story. Why do I feel like we also made like a couple of Star Wars references as well?
There was a Tatooine.
There was Tatooine.
Well.
Yes. It's interesting because like I think that there were so many moments in the movie where we were like, oh, hey, this looks like this, but just done bad.
Yeah. So it almost felt like at certain points during the movie.
Oh, and we made Lord of the Rings references.
Yes.
Smog. That's what it was.
Yep. There's definitely some Smog. That dragon looked very much like Smog.
It really did.
Without the benefit of Benedict Cumberbatch being the voice.
That was supposed to be, if I remember correctly, for those of you who have seen the series, it was supposed to be Avatar Roku. If you have not, as we mentioned in the summary, Aang had multiple incarnations. And it goes in a cycle. So he'll be a waterbender, an earthbender, a firebender, an airbender, and it will cycle all the way through. And so Avatar Roku was a firebender and that has implications with why the Fire Lord decided to take over, but that would be explained in later series, so I'm not going to get into it. There was supposedly, I remember when I first saw this movie and they were talking about the casting and everything like that, they said the dragon was supposed to be Avatar Roku talking to him.
Right.
Which did happen, but he wasn't in dragon form. He was just himself being like, let me talk to you. But that's the thing with Aang. He talks to his previous incarnations to learn from them. We kind of saw that briefly with Avatar Kyoshi. She was just kind of like, oh, hey, this was your previous incarnation, when we got to my favorite spot in the movie, which was the Earthbenders.
I do like the Earthbenders. You
Why?
were not a fan of the Earthbenders.
Listen.
All right. I like the Earthbenders.
Well, we needed to talk about the bending as a whole, so we might as well just circle back.
Let's just get into that.
Let's just go back in the cycle.
I will, because you pointed this out to me. Well, so when we were watching Ong learn, wait, you're calling him Aang, right?
I'm calling him Aang. You can call him Ong. I'm not going to defriend you.
Fair. Good. I know you can't at this point.
You can. You're living in my house right now, so for 24 hours.
For 24 hours. So Ong, when he was learning waterbending, my first reaction was, he's just doing Tai Chi. And then Ryan pointed out to me that, in fact, every bending motion is connected to a specific martial art.
Correct.
I'm going to let you expand on that a little bit.
So I don't remember exactly like every single martial art that is to it, but what I did love is that and they did carry this, or at least try to with this movie, and this is something that I do appreciate, so I'll give it a positive on that, is that every single bending is a different style of martial arts to make it unique. And so yes, Tai Chi could be considered very similar to the waterbending because it is a little bit more smoother, a little bit
flowing.
Yes, and that's why, like, they talk about this in the cycle is that, because the moon covers the water and the air aspects, and then the sun covers the earth and the fire aspects. So there is fluidity within the earth and the air and the water, and there's a little bit more ruggedness and a little bit more strength to the earth and the fire aspect as well. So they try to do that, I think, to the best. My problem was with this movie was that in the animated series, with every movement you did, there was some sort of the bending occurring. Whereas in the movie, it was like you really it's like, I'm going to compare it to like when you pull the string to get your lawnmower going. You got to rev it up several times before something actually happens. And I felt like, but at the same time, though, it was like we saw that throughout the movie where it was like you needed a lot of movement going on before anything happened. But then at the end of the film with like Iroh, the scene in the cave with the moon spirit and the water spirit, I had pointed out to you because he was moving, there was already stuff happening. And then when he came to the final conclusion, it became bigger. I was like, that's what the bending is supposed to look like. And then there's the earth bending scene. Listen.
And so I will say, you can YouTube this or I'm sure Avatar, the animated series is streaming, and you can see this distinct difference in the animated series where every move they make produces something. It's not just like button mashing on Mortal Kombat. Like they are absolutely every motion presents something in return. So I get that now, but I saw those after watching them, watching the film. So I didn't take an issue with it. And Ryan's the one that brought this up, but I absolutely see.
Well, yeah, but you had to go back and look at it. Yeah. So it's like, that's the downside is that if somebody who's never seen the animated series, they're not going to know any different.
Yeah. So I totally went and digress, but explain the earthbending situation
So,
to everyone.
For those of you, I had warned Lindsay before we watched this. I was like, my least favorite scene is the earthbending scene. So the earthbending scene, Aang, Katara, and Sokka show up. The earthbenders are within confinement because I guess there's not a lot of them, and the Earth Kingdom is taken over. No, not the Earth Kingdom, sorry. The Fire Kingdom has taken over because they brought in metal. Metal, for those of you who are aware or not aware, metal is kind of one of those elements that, with the exception of certain people, are not able to bend against or work with. There are metal benders, but they're not introduced until much later in the series. So the Earth Kingdom, or at least this portion of the Earth Kingdom, is taken over. And so, as we mentioned in the summary, Sokka, Katara, and Aang are like trying to convince them to start doing stuff. And they're literally like saying, there is earth all around you. And they decide to start fighting. And the earthbenders I have seen from the series, and even if you didn't see the series, it's like there's earth all around them. There's dirt, there's stone, there's pebbles. They can move stuff. There's a scene where 5 or 6 earthbenders are moving in absolute synchronicity. And they're like, yeah, we're going to do this. And what do? They pick up like just this kind of big stone and then they punch it. And I'm like, really? 5 earthbenders moving in synchronicity can only move a slightly big stone to inconvenience a firebender.
Yeah, I would call it like a medium-sized stone.
It didn't matter. There were 5 of them.
Yeah, it wasn't in the boulder category. I don't think.
But okay, let me.
No, and I'm with you. I agree. 5 of them definitely should have been able to do more. And I was like, I think it's fine.
Especially because the one father, like literally kind of made a barrier wall by himself, and 5 earthbenders could only float a medium-sized stone to be kind of moved again and then basically push it into a firebender.
So I definitely just had this moment of, well, it's 2-pronged thing. So one was the way I'm hearing you describe it makes me feel like the earthbenders are just like the dumb jocks of the bending community.
Well, okay, maybe a little bit.
Right. But then, which, that's fine. They're big and they're brawny and they can move giant boulders.
Yes.
Great. And then I thought, well, okay, so they're the dumb jocks. Or have they just been so oppressed and beaten down that now they don't think that they have and I'm going to lean on you for your animated knowledge, but have they been like so oppressed and beaten down that they just forgot that they're capable of doing this stuff?
No. So the thing is that like they talk about like with earthbending is that of course it's like, okay, I'm going to go a little bit off track with this. Okay. I'm going to go a little bit further into the series. There is a character that is later introduced by the name of Toph.
Okay.
Toph is younger than Aang, but she's blind. So she actually can sense everything through her earthbending because her feet are always on the ground.
Very cool. Okay.
Yes. So like she doesn't really see a lot when she's not on the ground because she depends upon her earthbending to tell her where everything is.
Gotcha.
So I do definitely think that there is a sort of strength to earthbending, and it does kind of show a little bit later in the series, but then you have a character who like Toph, who's this young child, blind, and is like this scrawny little thing. So it's more, I think, that about you're planted on the ground.
Okay.
And that's how you kind of move about things.
I get that.
Which is respectable.
Yeah.
But it's like, if you're going to go into that aspect, I'm not going to get too deep into it, but you could also deem astrological signs that way.
Let's go deep into astrological science.
Well,
folks.
I mean, it's like, you're planted on the ground and you don't move. You're stubborn as a result of it, which I feel is more in tune with the earthbending aspect.
Okay.
You're more stubborn. You're a little bit more, this is how things are going to be. The thing is that in the series, this part I don't recall ever happening, where now they do talk about that the Earth Kingdom wants to take over the Earth Kingdom, but that's not until like another season or two in.
Mm-hmm.
So no, next season. So the thing is that I'm not saying that it's not implausible that the Earth Kingdom could have already started taking over the smaller portions of the Earth Kingdom. But at this point in the Water Tribe season, we're actually learning about certain characters, which unfortunately are not introduced into the movie. I don't know why they didn't do this. I thought at first it was because it was a situation of, we have all this season, we don't want to, go over our time or anything like that. But there are two major characters that were introduced in this season that did not make it into the movie.
Yeah, and I'm actually looking up right now because for those of you who have seen the movie, it starts with book 1,
Mm-hmm.
right in the prologue.
They were supposed to continue with it, but it didn't do well at the box office, so that's why.
Yeah, okay.
So it was water, earth, fire, and then air, I think, was the final season.
Not to be confused with Captain Planet.
Are we going to talk about that?
Yeah, let's go ahead and talk about that.
Can we talk about that? You know what? I want you to take care of that, because you and I both were like, so it's exactly what we think it is.
So I loved Captain Planet as a child.
Who doesn't?
I remember watching it distinctly, and it's probably the reason I recycle so avidly today, even knowing that only 10% of the things I put in the recycling bin actually get recycled. But it still makes me feel better doing it.
Yes.
I was a 90s child brainwashed by reduce, reuse, recycle.
I mean, all of us were.
Yes. And Captain Planet played such a big role in that. But the earth, wind, water, fire, heart. Ah, you got that. I'm glad.
So they do actually mention that, in the movie. Grandma, I don't know what her official name is, but Grandma does mention, because she's like, he's the heart of the elements. And you and I looked at each other and were like, so it's Captain Planet?
Yes.
Which is, I guess, not inaccurate, but an interesting way of describing it.
Yeah. I have such a hard time understanding the scripting of this entire film, because I know that these actors are so capable.
Right.
And good actors, and they've been in so many other things.
And they're all funny.
Yes.
Which is
and entertaining to watch. And so I have to believe that the bad acting, and any actors or anyone out there who has acted in any form who has been given a bad script knows when they've been given a bad script. I have to wonder if these actors knew, because a lot of it, and maybe some of it was young acting. I get that, but some of it was just, I can't imagine them. They just sound like they're reading the script. And so some of that has to be directing too, you would think, right?
I would think so. And it's only because I'm comparing it to also like The Happening. You have people like Mark Wahlberg that was in The Happening.
Yeah.
And you watch that film and you're like, oh God,
Yeah.
what are you doing? And it's also like, okay, I'm going to circle back a little bit on this. Sokka is a hilarious character. He is the comic relief throughout the entire series.
Yes.
He has his serious moments. Yes, he is supposed to be a warrior that is trying to help fend, and it's because he's one of the very few men left in the Water Tribe. And his father said
That
hey,
was unclear.
It was not
in the movie.
Yeah, exactly. It was unclear. So I guess I'll go a little bit further back. So Sokka and Katara's mother was murdered in the whole Fire Tribe situation. She was murdered. their father decided he was going to help create a rebellion against the Fire Nation.
Okay.
So he left with a couple other people, and he said, hey, Sokka, take care of your sister, take care of everybody. So Sokka felt this big, like, he has to help fend for it. He was one of the very few, well, actually, he might have been the oldest male in the Water Tribe where he lived, because most of them were women. So he was like, I have to help hunt. I have to help fend for everybody. Katara, her character, she was always like a motherly type, but she was also, I know, you give me that look, for those of you, Katara. So Lindsay was like, wait a minute, what?
Yeah.
So she was always a motherly figure throughout the series, but as you know from the movie, that was not portrayed. She was bumbling waterbender who didn't know what the hell she was doing. Mm-hmm. Whereas at the beginning of the show, she has a pretty good like idea of how to waterbend. Okay. She just continues to get better throughout the series. Because then there's that Zuko-Katara fight that could have been, but
we did watch the animated version.
We did. I did show you that. But I'm going back to Sokka. He's a funny character, and it's not shown in this because we have these weird moments with him where he's talking about, well, Dad told me how to like track the seals and everything like that. Like at the very beginning, he's like upset because he thought
did everything right.
Exactly. Yeah. And you're like, okay, this has nothing to do really with the movie.
I did find that bit very confusing.
Yeah, that was a really bad
I moved past it because suspension of disbelief.
Ball with giant fuzzball and Aang were in it. So you're like, okay, I'm going to forget about this really weird scripted moment.
Yeah.
And Jackson Rathbone is a funny person.
Yeah. And Zuko, I think you had mentioned Zuko was cast because he was is, I assume still currently, a black belt in his martial art.
No, that was actually Aang.
That's who I meant.
Aang no, that's fine.
Zuko.
No, but it did look like based off of the martial arts that we did see, because the one thing about the Firebenders is that they're a little bit more intimate and a little bit more aggressive with their art style, is that it did very much look like Dev Patel did take the time to actually do the stage combat.
Yeah.
Whereas Aang is a martial artist, and that is one of the reasons that they picked him.
And I can absolutely... So Aang's movements had me hooked from the very beginning. I didn't care what his script was. I didn't care what he said. I know you care, but you're looking at it in a different lens.
No.
For me, like one of my first initial reactions, let's try that again. My initial reaction in watching Aang move was that he looks like a child, and also he looks like he's ancient.
Yes.
Which makes total sense in his character because he is both of those things. And the fact that he could embody that in just his movements was fascinating for me.
I will give you that, actually. I did think that he, as a whole, his martial art style, no matter what it was actually very impressive. My qualm was the bending and the animation as a whole, which is based on what they decided to do.
Yeah.
But then you see that amazing scene. There's no bending to it. I don't understand why. There's the bending scene between, the martial arts scene between Katara and Aang, where they're practicing their waterbending movement. Nothing happens. I don't understand why, because that's not something that happens in the series. But you could very clearly see that one is very much into it, but then you see the other one who has very much studied it.
Yeah.
Which is Aang versus Nicola. So it's like they both are really doing an amazing job for that scene. But then you have Noah, who is he's an incredible martial artist. My favorite scene with him was when the blue spirit came up,
Which we haven't talked about the blue spirit yet.
If I may, I knew that this part was coming, and I remember you being like, "What? What the hell is going on?" You were so confused, and I was just like sipping on my gin and tonic, not saying anything. And that scene was really well done. Also, probably because I'm not 100% positive, but the person who was playing the blue spirit was probably not Dev Patel, but probably also a martial artist.
Oh, I'm sure. But
that scene was amazing.
So well. And I really appreciated the costuming. So in the group
Are we going to talk about costuming? I'm down for costuming.
Yes, let's do it. So for those of you who don't know, we may have talked about this previously in the Mr. Ripley podcast. Mr. Ripley episode.
Yes.
Go back and check it out. Ryan has worked as a costume designer, as have I, but not to the extent that she.
Yeah, but you and I both appreciate beauty when we see it.
So I liked the fact that they gave the blue spirit a distinguishing feature of that giant hair,
which
was necessary.
Yes, it is. It's not a part of the animated series, but I actually did appreciate the mask.
For the film
is the
and
same.
The fight choreography, that was absolutely necessary because there were some dark moments, literally dark. The screen was very dark.
There were a lot of dark scenes. In that movie
where it was difficult to distinguish between who was who because a lot of them were wearing masks.
Right.
And so the blue spirit's distinguishing feature was his hair. So
the mask is absolutely accurate. The wig or the hair is different from the animated series, but I actually do appreciate it because it was interesting because for those of you who have seen the series or have not, you might have noticed that the benders have very distinguished colors. The earthbenders are always wearing green. The airbenders are always wearing some sort of tan or yellow or orange. The firebenders are always wearing red or gold. It's ornate. So in this particular scene, there are a lot of people wearing black uniforms.
Yeah.
So it's like when you see the blue spirit, he is wearing full black attire with the exception of the mask and the wig. The wig does kind of discern him because you'll be seeing just a sea of people in black uniforms and you'll see this tuft of crazy black hair and you're like, oh, hey, that's the good guy.
I really imagine the conversation happening between the costume designers, and I feel like it's similar to that in, if anyone's ever seen Grandma's Boy. I don't know if have you ever seen Grandma's Boy? Please tell me you have. Okay, good. So there's a scene in Grandma's Boy where they're trying to figure out how to distinguish the different type of dwarves, I think, in this one video game. And they were like, let's just make them a different color. And that's kind of what I feel like happened with the blue spirit, which was, why don't we just give him this giant hair?
Look, it worked for Samuel L. Jackson in the Abominations that were the prologue Star Wars movies. He had the purple lightsaber. Let's just go with it.
Yeah, no, I'm totally for it because as a viewer, it made him easier to distinguish.
Your reaction, though, to seeing him was hilarious.
He looks like Michael Jackson. He even had this move.
we did. I did actually at one point start adding Michael Jackson sounds to him.
Yeah,
for you.
And so we did rewind it at one point.
We had to rewind a couple times.
It was right after he cut Ong from the chains. And he did have this little move that was very Michael Jackson.
It was
and coupled with the hair and the mask, it looked very much like, I don't know, it looked like a nod. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but that is what we saw.
I thought that was M. Night Shyamalan's version of, okay, this part's going to be really spooky and mysterious. And they tried
Is that your M. Night Shyamalan voice?
Okay. Yes. Very spooky and mysterious.
I don't know if I've ever heard M. Night Shyamalan talk.
Well, watch the interviews from the Nickelodeon.
Okay.
Yeah, because he did interviews for this movie. He did. And he's like, I'm doing this for my children. No. Okay, fair enough. But he's like, I'm going to be very mysterious and spooky, and this is going to be scary. And it was, well, not was scary, but it's like you see these moments where he's like, he kind of moves through the shadows, and then he's like, I've got people strung up on chains that appeared out of nowhere, and General Shao's like, what the hell?
You know what? I will say, I did not see the reveal coming, and maybe it's
Did you
because
really?
I really had no idea.
Really?
I really didn't.
Okay.
And when he pulled his mask off as the blue spirit,
like,
and
dun,
he was
dun,
Zuko,
dun.
I was like, how did I not see that? I'm losing my touch. But I wasn't upset about it. I was really pleased that I didn't see that coming.
You
probably already knew it was coming.
I did, but it was. I will say this: when there were kind of hints throughout the animated series that he might have been, but there were other people that, like, I think were theorized. So when Aang removed his mask, because that is accurate to the live action and the animated series. That whole scene was accurate for the most part. The sad thing is that I was like, oh, I kind of anticipated that it was him, but it was kind of nice to also know at the same point that, like, because at that point in the series, it was like, everyone was like, okay, Zuko is not as bad as everyone thinks he is.
Right.
At the same point, you also know that he's saving Aang for his own agenda, but it is kind of a scene where it's like, maybe he has some good in him, which does carry throughout the series.
I do like that point, too, where he and Aang had that moment, and Aang was like, we could have been friends,
They were friends in 4 seasons from then. But, I mean...
But you can see that. You can see that, like, that's like the seed planted.
I genuinely...
Where they could potentially be friends. And having never seen the animated series, I hope, and again, I just kind of fill in my own backstory and friend story as a watcher. And my hope is like, yeah, Aang and Zuko, they're like besties. They're in each other's weddings and... They have this whole life together.
Well, as I said, I do actually enjoy the Fire Nation as a whole. I thought that the characters and the actors throughout that did the most with what they were given. There were some really weird exposition points.
Yeah.
Which, actually, I'm going to bring up this point. I never brought it up with you prior. And the thing is that I think that M. Night Shyamalan did anticipate to continue with the series. Yeah. Which I hope that's where he was going.
You get that from the whole book one. Like, you don't put book one on a film if you don't.
But he's done that several times as well. The elevator movie with Hell, he did that too. He did like a book one sort of situation. But, so I was talking about how much I love the Fire Nation, because I actually felt like, okay, so if I may,
You may.
Well, so I feel like Dev Patel, who played Zuko.
Yes, he did.
Yes, he did. Did a really great job. And it was only because there was that whole scene where him and Uncle Iroh were on General Shao's ship, and then we got the exposition talking about how he was banned from the Fire Nation and that he shouldn't be wearing this uniform, blah 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 blah. But then we have that amazing scene where him and Uncle Iroh were together in the Fire Nation, Earth Kingdom. It was the Earth Kingdom.
Yeah,
and Uncle Iroh was talking about, oh, look at all the pretty girls and everything like that. You should start looking. And then we have that intimate moment where it was weird. It was still kind of weird because he brought the kid over and he's like, tell me what you know about the Fire Nation's prince. And it got a little weird, but it was still at the same time somewhat intimate because he's talking about this horrible situation that he was put in.
Yeah.
Which was accurate to the animated series.
And I appreciated that, having not seen the animated series.
Which brings me to this point. The scene where General Shao is basically like harassing him and like giving the 2-minute exposition of what Zuko's life was not necessary, because you could have removed that you still could have kind of been like, oh, he was banned by the Fire Nation, and then still have this very intimate moment between nephew and uncle, and found out why he was banned. That scene I loved, and I wish we had more moments like that where we had that gentle exposition as opposed to, let me tell you why he was banned by his own father.
I think it's important too that we get the outside perspective of the child versus just a Zuko Uncle Iroh interaction, is because the child brings in like how widely his story is known, but also the parts of it that aren't correct.
Right. And I'm not saying that like having a rumor on the side, because that is something interesting. He's like, oh, well, you heard that like he was banned.
Yeah, it's like this is just known. Like this is what's taught in schools to children.
Which I wish is what it was just as opposed to, oh, he dishonored his father. He decided to challenge his father.
We have to talk about the dinner.
All right.
I mean, we're on Fire Nation. We're talking about Zuko.
All right, here we go.
What was that speech that I totally led into it and had nothing.
Wait, are we talking about General Shao or are we talking about?
Yes, we're talking about
That's
General
what we were
Zhao.
talking about just right now.
Okay.
Where it's like, he's like, oh, well, he insulted his father and all of a sudden it's like he's been banned. And oh, by the way, he can't even wear the uniform, but we're going to let him do it just to make fun of him. And that's 100% what it was. And you're just sitting there like,
this is like Ryan's rendition of General Zhao as a mean girl.
Yes, because we were drinking Regina Rosé earlier. But am I that far off?
You're not.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. No, I mean it's
not far off.
And it is also akin to a Game of Thrones scene, to multiple Game of Thrones scenes, again, which hadn't existed.
But that's the problem with this movie is that it shoves exposition down your throat within a minute or two.
And that's the problem with doing a movie about a series versus the other way around.
Right. And I'm not saying that it was going to be 100% perfect, but it's like, and I also know that it's several episodes being shoved into a single movie.
Yeah.
But the fact that you are literally doing it in this short amount of time is that you know that people have seen the series.
Yeah.
And are depending upon that. So it's like, okay, well, I already know all the exposition.
Yeah.
But if you're somebody who's like you, who's never seen it, you're like, oh, okay. All right, I'm going to take notes. All right. That's 100% what it came down to. In not just that weird dinner scene, but several other scenes.
It's very akin to a movie based off a book where certain aspects are dependent on, or even maybe just shouting out to people actually reading the book or people actually seeing the series.
But I feel like if you like compare it to something like Harry Potter, it takes its time to explain everything to you.
That's true.
And I feel like this movie could have taken its time to explain things to you.
Yeah.
As well. You had that, like we said, you had that intimate moment with Zuko and Iroh where they kind of are like, this is what really happened. You didn't have to do this whole big thing with General Shao. You could have just been like, oh, well, he's been banned.
Yeah.
But we're going to be nice and we're still going to let him on the ship. Oh, they told me that I can't be I wanted to be Avatar. They told me I couldn't live the life that I wanted. You could have left it at that. It didn't have to be this whole exposition like being shoved down your throat in the weirdest of places. Yeah. And then you have other moments where Sokka and Yue are the best of friends in 5 seconds or less.
This is what we would call a quote unquote efficient movie, which for better.
Bless you.
Yes, it is an efficient movie. It packs as much as it can pack into less than 2 hours.
Would you call that efficient?
I would say that I got the gist of the storyline in less than 2 hours. But
I love that
again,
you're gritting your teeth while you say it.
no, I am, because it was, let's be honest, for all intents and purposes, it was not a well done movie. It wasn't, I'm just going to come right out and say it. I don't think it was a well done movie. That said, it was a beautiful movie.
It was a beautiful
movie. It was a
yes.
feast for the eyes.
Yes.
And the senses.
It was beautiful in regards to the costume.
Yeah.
Except for those sideburns.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot about that. The sideburns were so weird. So if you go back and you watch the movie, specifically with the Fire Nation,
General Lord Ozai is what you're specifically looking at for this moment.
Yep. And there are distinctly different sideburns. There are distinctly different sideburns for what appears to be each ranking member of the Fire Nation.
And I don't understand that because it just doesn't make any sense.
And as two costumers, or two people who have costumed in the past, we were I was racking, and I actually paused it and looked at Ryan, and I was like, explain this to me. And neither of us could really wrap our heads around it. So
that's okay, because Ozai's sideburns wrapped around his ears.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess the thought behind that is just more of a designer choice.
I was like, please explain this to me.
No. Anything that I say as far as like this clearly meant that he was in charge of an no. I have no idea what I'm talking about.
I don't understand it either. You paused it, and I was like, I never noticed that in the movie.
Yeah, it bugged me. And I think like that's just a random attention to detail that stuck out.
No, it's fair. If you legitimately watch it and you see General Lord Ozai, sideburns are usually supposed to go in the front of the earlobe down to the jaw. For whatever reason, this actor's sideburns went backwards around his ear and started going for his jawbone.
Well, it went on the front, but it like wrapped around.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
It did. It curved inwards as opposed to curving outwards. And Lindsay paused and she went, so you're a costumer? Explain this to me.
Yeah, it was only extremely apparent when they were right next to each other in that one specific scene, but I couldn't.
Pink. Oh, and his lips puckering.
His lips puckered Donald Trump style. Like it was very because I've seen him in other things. That definitely was a character choice. For what? I don't know, but
I don't understand it either, because he was just like, lips puckered. A handsome Squidward is what I would have equivocated.
He is a handsome Squidward. That's not his normal facial expression, so that definitely was a character choice.
No, but General Zell's talking to him, and the whole time he's got his lips puckered. He's like, and we're like, what are you doing?
That's him pretending to care, is what that is.
Well, actually, that probably would be accurate to Ozai. Actually, he's an asshole.
Yeah, he is.
He's a dick of a father.
I also I want to cover this before we fully wrap this up or digress into the deeper depths of this movie, whichever way this takes us. But the Fire Nation representing industrialism.
Yeah, we pointed that out, actually,
as we were watching the movie. And that is very apparent specifically in the film. And I don't know if that is a huge point of contention in the cartoon.
It is, because
animated series.
Well, it is because they depend on metal, because they also talk about the major four elements, but then they also at a later point talk about how you can connect to elements to get another element. So like, for instance, they talk about how earth bending and water bending can create plant bending. So there are people that can 100%. I know the face.
Ryan just blew my mind. I have plan bending. This is the first time that's come up.
So they control water through plants, but the plant looks like it's moving. So metal bending is an element between earth and fire. However, very few people know how to do it.
Okay.
Toph, who I mentioned earlier in this review, is able to actually see the metal parts and bend them. But they depend upon the fact that they are, yes, in fact, using a lot of metal, and that a lot of people are not able to bend it, and they use that to their advantage. But it comes back to bite them in the butt in the last 2 seasons of the show.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of in your face. I mean, I liked it. I appreciated it.
You had the ash falling in the Northern Water Tribe. You're like, what is this? Black snow? And you're like, oh, that's not like you think it is.
No. So many webs can be drawn to that black snow.
1990s children.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know. It was super interesting to me to see the Fire Tribe. Fuck. What am I talking about?
Fire Nation.
Fire Nation. Thank you. I don't know. It was just interesting to me to see the Fire Nation depicted as like this nation of industrialized people coming to these other nations with their big machines is what they called them.
Right.
And it felt very akin to, you know, the dawning of humanity as we know it now, and what things had to be sacrificed in order to create the life that we currently live.
Well, I think it's also very much apparent to like our generation as well, because we grew up with a lot of movies that talked about like, and TV series that talked about like, you know, recycling,
Captain Planet again,
Fern Gully.
Yeah.
For instance,
I do love Fern Gully. But yes.
What was that weird one where the animals are trying to save their friend, and like it has Michael, what's his name from the Phantom of the Opera in it and everything like that.
Animal Farm?
No, that's a book.
It's
but
a
like
too.
we grew up with, you know, saving the environment and like having
even like our cartoons growing up.
Sonic had
Rocko's Modern Life.
Yes, Sonic had, you know, hey kids, remember to recycle and everything like that. So there is that like thing that I think becomes apparent to a certain generation where it's like, oh, yeah, we're killing our planet. We're killing our planet possibly as a result of this, which I don't know if that was the intention with the Fire Nation. I don't feel like it was very much like prevalent in the animated series, but at the same time, everything that happens with the Fire Nation wasn't necessarily anything that didn't happen in the series. So I can't argue it. I think it's just that for like you and me and certain like scenes and aspects that they decided to go with, we became hyper aware.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I get that.
Yeah.
And with that sigh, I think we're coming to the end of this review of Avatar. So we are going to rate this movie. And for those of you who don't know, we rate everything with the size of popcorn, small to small. Let's try that again. For those of you who don't know, For those of you who don't know, we rate everything with a size of popcorn. Small to extra large, the bigger the size, the better the movie in each host's opinion, and we modify them however we feel like. So Ryan, I'm going to throw it to you to give me your popcorn rating on this show.
You're already laughing as you say this to me. So here's the thing. I do respect M. Night Shyamalan for trying to make a movie that he was inspired off of with his children and everything. That being said, despite the fact that there were some beautiful martial art styles and the beautiful scenery and the costume, it didn't make up for the fact that the exposition was shoved down your throat. There are certain like summary points that were just either didn't need to be made or there wasn't enough of it. The acting was not that great, and I'm going to go based off of the scripting and the directing. So I'm going to have to give this a small popcorn, and I'm going to probably have to make it majority burnt. No butter, no salt. Well, actually, I'll rephrase that. I will make it a small popcorn that is burnt at the bottom with a little bit of salt and a little bit of butter. It gets you going at the very beginning, and then it's just bitter tears at the end.
Well, I appreciate that, right?
Do you?
I mean, I absolutely expected your popcorn rating, so
Were you expecting
I appreciate that. No, I too will give it a small, but I won't give it a burn small. Mm-hmm. For me, not having seen the animated series, I think was probably a boon. So I appreciated it, or I should say, not necessarily appreciated. I enjoyed it a little bit more than I think Ryan did. I will also give it a small popcorn. A little bit of butter at the top. You know, it kind of gets more disappointing as it goes on. But I mean, overall, I did it. It was pretty to watch. That's what I have to say about it. Don't listen to it. Turn the sound off and put some nice music in the background. Honestly, you'd probably enjoy it more that way. Maybe put the subtitles on.
Watch the actual series instead.
Yeah.
Put that on the back burner.
Watch the actual series instead. I wouldn't watch it first if you want to enjoy this movie. Clearly, watch
the Nickelodeon series.
But it was helpful to have Ryan there to point out some of the things that I missed. All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening. You can follow the show's social media at FilmstripPod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. There you will find announcements about upcoming shows and a link to our Letterboxd page, which contains our entire list of reviews. Go to filmstrippodcast.com to link to our anchor.fm distribution site where you can find your podcast platform of choice, Apple, Spotify, Google, etc. Please share the show, and if you can, leave us a positive review as it helps other people find the podcast. For Ryan, I'm Lindsay. Thank you for listening to Filmstrip.
Thank you for listening to Filmstrip. You can find more episodes on our website, filmstrippodcast.com. The Filmstrip theme music is produced and performed by Frozen Lake 121. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.